Watching Money Talks with me, Oscar Subakdi. Coming up on the program, a ceasefire in Gaza is announced that promises a plan to rebuild the enclave's economy and infrastructure. Will 2025 be another bumper year for US banking giants? And Rolls-Royce gears up for a major expansion. After a ceasefire for Gaza was announced, the outgoing US President Joe Biden highlighted the suffering of Palestinians, saying they had endured 15 months of hell. The three-phase truce brokered in Doha aims to end the bloodshed, deliver desperately needed aid, and promises a plan to rebuild the war-torn enclave. The war has decimated much of Gaza's infrastructure, crippled its economy, and all but destroyed its healthcare system. Some estimates suggest the rebuilding effort could cost tens of billions of dollars and take years, if not decades. Now, Gaza's reconstruction begins with clearing some 42 million tonnes of rubble, estimated to cost around $1.5 billion. The hazardous debris, contaminated with asbestos and other poisons, contains human remains. This presents long-term health risks. Clearing it all may take as much as 14 years. Two-thirds of Gaza's buildings, or 69% of its structures, are damaged or destroyed. This includes over 245,000 housing units, leaving some 1.8 million people in need of emergency shelter. The rebuilding process could stretch beyond the year 2040. Now, essential services such as water, roads and electricity are badly damaged. Only 25% of pre-war water supplies remain, and 68% of roads are destroyed. Over half of Gaza's agricultural land is degraded, exacerbating food insecurity among the population. The war has devastated 136 schools, 823 mosques and 200 government facilities, halting public services. With only 17 out of 36 hospitals partially operational, access to healthcare is critically strained. The destruction further isolates Gaza, complicating recovery and aid efforts. Let's get more on this now with Mustafa Barghouti, who's the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. Really good to have you back with us, Mustafa. Let's start with the broader aims of the ceasefire. Obviously, the main thing here is to end the 15-month-long war. But after that, we're going to be looking at the reconstruction effort, which, as we know, is a mammoth task and could take decades. In your view, what needs to happen in terms of that rebuilding effort immediately? What is the main priority?
Well, this ceasefire is needed immediately to stop the destruction, because if the war continues, we will see not only the presence of destruction, but more destruction in the coming days and months. So the ceasefire is aiming at stopping what's happening. But then, of course, the second issue will be the exchange of prisoners, where Israeli prisoners will be released in exchange of releasing approximately 1,980 Palestinian prisoners, including many hundreds of those who are under life imprisonment. Then comes, of course, the third issue and most important issue, which is the reconstruction. As you have mentioned, the damage, the destruction is beyond description. The operation of rebuilding Gaza will not be successful, will not happen unless there is a collective international community support to helping the process of reconstruction. That would start with the most vital issues like infrastructure that includes water, electricity networks, communication networks, medical facilities, health facilities, educational facilities. But if the international community has failed us drastically in not being able to force Israel to stop this damage and this genocide, at least it should help us rebuild and reconstruct. But I think part of the effort should be pressure on Israel to force it to pay compensation for much of what it has damaged. This is the only way to refrain and to stop Israel from repeating this crime again in Gaza Strip.
And a plan for the reconstruction and rebuilding effort appears in the third phase of this truce. And we know already there are serious concerns about whether or not even the first phase of this ceasefire will be implemented to its full extent. How hopeful are you that not only will we see a successful first and second phase, but indeed a third phase that promises a reconstruction plan?
We have to be optimistic. We have to look forward to, in a positive manner, to what we can do and what we can achieve. Of course, we know Netanyahu is going to maneuver. We know that without external pressure, Netanyahu would not have agreed to this deal. We know that he's preparing the ground for using any issue to reactivate the war, because he knows that stopping the war completely will mean the collapse of his government. We know all of that. And Biden finally said what he should have said months ago, that Netanyahu lacked the courage to accept a ceasefire before because he couldn't confront the extremists in his own government. Biden lied before when he claimed that it was it was Hamas and the Palestinians that blocked the possibility of a ceasefire. And now we are discovering clearly who was obstructing. It was Israel, it was Netanyahu, with the help and support of people like Blinken and Biden, unfortunately. In this formula, we know that there is a new element, regardless of the fact that Trump's administration is biased to Israel. Trump, through his pressure to force Netanyahu to stop to have a ceasefire and to stop the war, because Trump needs that, and Netanyahu could not confront Trump. So what will happen in the second and third stage will also depend on this particular aspect of the relationship that is happening between Israel and the United States. But definitely, without continuous pressure from the international community, without sustaining this pressure on Netanyahu, we could see a collapse, and we could see reactivation of the war, something that we do not want. I'm still optimistic because also of another factor. The cost of this war was horrible for Palestinians, but the cost of this war was very big and painful for Israel as well. Whether we are talking about an unprecedented number of human losses in the Israeli military, or whether we talk about economic losses that is putting the Israeli economy at the edge of collapse. So there are factors that force Netanyahu to stop or force the Israeli establishment to stop. We know it's not going to be an easy journey, but we know one thing: everything we should do should be about saving our people, about removing the pain that is affecting our people in Gaza, about reducing the suffering that people have had in Gaza so far.
And Mustafa, before the war, the economy in Gaza was largely dependent on external aid, including from the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. We know during Trump's first administration, he cut funding to UNRWA. We are preparing for a second Trump presidency. What do you think will happen to UNRWA under the US? Should Trump decide to cut funding again, are you confident that the rest of the international community will step in to ensure that aid continues to flow in?
They should, yeah, not only the international community, but specifically Arab and Muslim countries. I think they can support UNRWA and they can sustain UNRWA. UNRWA is the most important humanitarian organization today in Gaza. UNRWA's work and the Palestinian non-governmental organizations' work, the civil society work, are the most essential parts now that are sustaining the life of people in Gaza. So we cannot lose UNRWA. And that's why I think there has to be a strong campaign I don't expect Trump to support UNRWA. I think he will continue his policy in this regard. And we know that Israel wants to kill UNRWA in general. We can't lose UNRWA because of its vital role, not only in humanitarian support in Gaza, but in also sustaining the steadfastness of Palestinian refugees in the West Bank. And we can't lose UNRWA also because of a major political issue here, which is that UNRWA represents and resembles the right of return for Palestinian refugees, something that Israel wants to eliminate. So, in my opinion, the response to a possible American boycott of UNRWA and to Israeli policy is a greater support from international community, from European countries, and from Arab and Muslim countries in particular, who can, in my opinion, substitute for the loss that will be there. One more issue, it is really shameful that some Western governments have also suspended their support to UNRWA. That includes countries like Holland and countries like Sweden. That is shameful. These countries have always claimed that they are supportive of human rights and international law and international humanitarian law. And now they are committing a huge mistake by cutting off support to UNRWA.
Okay, Mustafa Barghouti, we will have to leave it there. It's always good to get your analysis. Thanks for joining us. Following the US Federal Reserve's much anticipated interest rate cuts last summer, the nation's banking sector is thriving despite challenging conditions. The US's 6 largest lenders reported impressive fourth quarter profits, fueled in part by Donald Trump's election victory, which triggered a surge in trading activity on Wall Street. JP Morgan and Wells Fargo posted around a 50% jump in fourth quarter net income, while Bank of America, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley saw their profits more than double compared with the same period last year. Citi also made a significant turnaround, swinging to a profit of $2.9 billion from a $1.8 billion loss in the final quarter of 2023. Now, this strong performance was mainly driven by a spike in trading activity, particularly in equities, both before and after the US elections. Investment banking units also enjoyed a boost as companies took advantage of relatively low borrowing costs to raise debt. 2024 was a stellar year for US bank stocks, with shares surging after the presidential election. Optimism around inflation prompted investors to shift away from technology stocks to sectors poised to benefit from lower borrowing costs. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan and Citi stood out as the top performers, significantly outpacing the S&P 500's 20% gain for the year. Let's get more now with Ross Feingold in Taipei. He's head of research at Ceres Consulting. Great to have you back with us. Now, firstly, a bumper year for the US major banks in 2024, no doubt. What's your outlook for them in 2025? Can they expect similar profits this year?
Keeping in mind what the Trump economic agenda is, and the most important things are deregulation and extending the 2017 tax cuts, I think the outlook for the financial industry is going to remain very positive, as will the outlook for the economy generally as a whole. Inflation hopefully will be coming down. As I said, there'll be deregulation. There'll also be a lot of pressure from the Trump administration for manufacturers to expand their presence in the United States, to manufacture at home and reduce manufacturing overseas. So the outlook is certainly positive, and we see that reflected in the bank stocks.
Yes, and as you say, a lot of the rally that we saw in banking stocks towards the end of last year was because of that Trump election victory and the prospect that he'll enact business-friendly policies throughout his second term in office. Do you think that those policies will come to bear? Because despite the Republicans having the majority in both houses of Congress, we are seeing a bit of pushback from some Republican elements as well. Do you think that we'll see those lawmakers cooperate and come on board with the Trump agenda?
Chances are they're going to cooperate and come on board. It's true that some of the ideas that are being discussed, especially with the tax cuts, might increase the budget deficit or the national debt. But in the past, when this has come up with Republicans who are supposed to be the party that is more concerned about debt or the national debt or budget deficits, the Republicans usually all come around to support the tax cuts and the deregulation. So I would expect that with unified government, and keeping in mind that the Republicans could use a process called reconciliation, they do not need 60 votes in the Senate, as is typical with most types of legislation, in order to end a filibuster. They only need a majority vote in the Senate because it's under this reconciliation process. I would expect even the more conservative House Democrats to come on board, because when it comes to making a choice between adding to the national debt or enacting tax cuts, I think Republicans generally are going to choose to make the tax cuts and hope that economic growth would, over the medium to the long term, reduce the effects on the debt or the budget deficit.
And Ross, we know Donald Trump is also promising to ramp up his trade war, not only with China, but also with its other trading partners, including Mexico and Canada. He's promised sweeping tariffs on any exports from those countries in particular, but also from other markets as well. Some economists are warning that those new tariffs could further exacerbate inflation. Are you worried about the impact that those tariffs might have not only on the US economy, but also the global economy?
Certainly, there's a lot of concern about that, both domestically in the U.S. as well as outside the U.S. The World Bank just issued a report that says that these kinds of tariff increases that are being discussed could weigh on global economic growth as well. But President Trump likes to cash in his campaign promises, and he did so in his first term on a number of different campaign promises, and he's going to look to do so again, which means that he probably will increase tariffs selectively with regard to goods from certain countries, perhaps most notably with China. The amount of those tariff increases remains to be seen. And for some other countries, it's probably going to be a way to get them to negotiate various trade deals with the United States. Is it going to weigh heavily on economic growth domestically and have an impact on President Trump's decision-making? Probably not, because he's going to look at his first-term experience and say, I raised tariffs on China quite a lot, and actually the U.S. economy didn't suffer from it. So Trump is going to rely on his instinct as well as his experience from his first term. So I'd be expecting that he takes action on raising tariffs with regard to China very quickly after Monday when he's sworn in.
Okay, Ross Feingold, thanks as always for sharing your thoughts with us. Appreciate it. Now, the incoming US President Donald Trump's threat to impose sweeping tariffs is expected to weigh heavily on Asian economic growth. Even before his election win, experts were forecasting a slowdown in exports. But how far the levies go present the biggest uncertainty for the region. Jamie Santirso reports from Beijing.
It's no secret Chinese electric vehicles are dominating globally. 2024 was a record-breaking year, with sales surging by more than 40%. Chinese EVs now account for more than 2/3 of the global market share.
How far ahead are Chinese EV brands? I would argue 2 generations. There's even examples of cars that are being released that, to my eye, look more modern than some of the prototypes that are being released by non-Chinese companies at car shows.
Along with batteries and solar power, Chinese EVs have become part of the country's ambition to transition to high-tech growth and a critical export. But the sector's in Washington's sights. Last year, the Biden administration quadrupled tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100%. Under Trump, the US is expected to harden its stance even further. Such moves could put the brakes on what's become a key driver for China's economy. EVs aside, Trump has threatened to impose tariffs of more than 60% on all goods from the country.
It is quite clear that China is growing out of exports, so consumption is really weak, investment is really weak. So what really drives the Chinese economy now is just export. So of course, tariffs from Trump would massively impact the Chinese economy.
The pressure is expected to reverberate throughout export-reliant economies in Asia.
Parts of Asia did benefit from Trump's initial trade war with China as companies shifted production away from the country, but broad-based tariffs this time around could inflict pain across the region.
Oxford Economics predicts non-China Asia will be a net loser, with exports falling by as much as 8%. How much pain there is will depend on how far Trump's tariffs go, and critically, whether he'll target markets China is rerouting its export through the US.
That's why we really need to see which approach Trump is going to take in terms of tariffs to the rest of Asia.
Experts say while Asia as a whole could hurt, some will weather the storm better than others. How the US diversifies its supply chains could separate winners and losers.
Apple has started producing iPhone in India. There are lots of semiconductor companies that moved to India. There are lots of manufacturing is happening through Vietnamese market. There are lots of manufacturing has moved to Bangladesh. So you will see the gradual growth in all these countries.
With limited reliance on Chinese manufacturing and shared strategic interests with the US, India could benefit in the long term. China, meanwhile, is readying itself for a fight and looks set to deploy stimulus to defend itself. But experts say it'll need to be far-reaching to offset what could be a turbulent ride for Beijing with Trump in office. Jaime Santirso, TRT World, Beijing.
Well, China's economic recovery gained momentum in the last quarter of 2024. The government's stimulus measures have played a pivotal role, lifting annual growth to meet official targets. Despite progress, challenges remain with weak domestic demand and external pressures. China's fourth quarter GDP grew by 5.4%, surpassing market forecasts of 5%. This marked a rise from the 4.6% growth in the third quarter, reflecting the impact of September's policy shift. Full-year GDP growth for 2024 reached 5%, aligning with Beijing's target. Mainland China's CSI 300 index edged up by 0.15% following the positive GDP data. The Chinese offshore yuan strengthened to 7.3 against the US dollar, while the 10-year government bond yield dropped by 2 basis points to 1.6%, showing market optimism. Now, retail sales in December rose by 3.7% year-on-year, exceeding expectations of 3.5%. Industrial output expanded by 6.2%, outperforming forecasts of 5.4%. Now, these gains contrast with a 10.6% decline in real estate investment. Well, urban unemployment rose slightly to 5.1% in December from 5% the previous month. Disposable income for urban residents grew by 4.4%, lagging behind rural income growth of 6.3%, indicating income inequality remains a challenge. Farah Murad is a senior market analyst at Equity Group. She says China's economic growth should have performed better.
We should have expected to have better than expected numbers, especially in the last GDP, in the last quarter. We had priced in the threats from Donald Trump, and too many companies, I believe they were trying to maybe benefit as much as they can from the current tariff levels so they wouldn't be affected in a much higher way once the tariffs become a reality. Also, we need to remember by the end of the year with December, it's a holiday season, consumption worldwide peaks. And that's probably another maybe important effect. It had an important effect on having a better number. So this is why exports came better than expected. Industrial activity came better than expected, but local demand, it's still facing major issues. In China, that seems like a major concern. Now, I want to discuss something that usually maybe we try to avoid, but it's the yuan currency and depreciation that we've seen. It's now on very low levels. And in order to boost consumption, some consider that this is a bad step to do. But we need to also remember whenever we have lower yuan, then the demand would shift to local products.
Take the best that exists and make it better. These are the words of Henry Royce, one of the founders of the British luxury car manufacturer Rolls-Royce. And more than a century later, the Silver Lady has done exactly that, with a planned $375 million investment at one of its UK plants. Pinar Nishasta takes a look.
Rolls-Royce builds high-end, luxurious cars for elite clientele, but some of them are asking for more. And seeing as the company's motto is "the only limit is the customer's imagination," it has decided to put $376 million into its Goodwood facility in the UK. This division, known as Bespoke, will enable the production of even more breathtaking vehicles, offering next-level personalization with handmade stitches, gold details, wooden structures, and many other valuable luxury options.
This investment is an important step for Rolls-Royce. It's a clear statement of the health of our organisation, and what it does is it will give us the space that we need to build the more complicated client commissions that we have with the growth of Bespoke.
The Goodwood facility started with 300 employees, building only one car a day. That number has risen to 2,500 employees and 28 cars a day after BMW took over, after Rolls-Royce wrapped up the third best sales result in the company's history. It sold 5,712 cars in 2024 at an average price tag of $600,000. It is, however, 5% lower than the 6,032 sold in 2023. It is highest ever, which it said it expected as it switches over to new models. Meanwhile, the incoming US Trump administration is threatening extra tariffs on imported goods.
In the future, in the United States, should there be a tariff situation, that's something that we'll have to take in our stride. But what we do know in the luxury industry, our clients tend to be more price elastic.
So, as long as Rolls-Royce follows the mantra of Henry Royce, and the customers have money, the brand seems set to roll on. Pınar Nişasta, TRT World.
And if you have any stories you'd like our reporters to look into or any questions for our experts, you can send us a post on X at TRT Money Talks. And that is all from Money Talks for now. From me and the whole team here in Istanbul, thanks for watching. Bye for now.